wonder exactly how much water is on Earth?
Sometimes, I suppose.
To measure the amount in gallons, it's a number that looks something like this.
That's a lot of zeros.
And how would you actually say this?
326 million, gajillion, bajillion, skillion.
Let me just stop you there. Wait, did you just say bajillion, sajillion?
Was that not right?
How about this? 326 million trillion.
That was close.
Sure you were. Anyway, that's how many gallons are on Earth in some form or another, and that number stays relatively constant.
Wait a minute. What about people saying don't waste the water? Some people can't come by this quite as easy as we do. Or our water supply is running out. Use sparingly. Don't these people know that there are 326 million trillion gallons of water on Earth?
Yes, but that doesn't mean that all of this water is readily available to use. There may be this much water on Earth, but let me break it down like this. The oceans are pretty big, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
About 70% of the planet is covered in ocean, and in fact, 98% of the water on the planet is in the oceans. The problem here is that the oceans contain salt, and lots of it, therefore is unusable for drinking. The amount of fresh, drinkable water only makes up about 2% of the planet's water. Unfortunately, 1.6% of the planet's water is locked up in polar ice caps and glaciers. Another 0.36% is found underground in springs and wells. And get this, only 0.036% of the planet's total water supply is found in lakes and rivers.
Hey, the city of Indianapolis gets its tap water from the White River.
That's right.
But all these rivers still make up thousands and trillions of gallons.
Yes, but it's a very small amount compared to all of the water in the world.
Not to mention all the water that's vaporizing into the sky as clouds, but what about all the water that's in plants and animals?
Glad you asked. The human body is about 65% water. The average man weighs about 175 pounds. That means about 114 pounds of the average man is water.
What?
There's also all the soda pop, milk, and orange juice you see in the store and in your refrigerator. There's probably several billion gallons of water sitting on a shelf at any one time. Now, why is this important to know? Remember how you said that Indianapolis gets its drinking water from the White River? It might be important to know where all that water comes from. Well, the White River flows south into the Wabash River. It gets a majority of its water from some of the nearby streams, creeks, and runs that flow into it.
Okay, so where do all these streams, creeks, and runs get their water?
Good question, and this is where it gets a little tricky. Most of the near east side of Indianapolis acts as a basin for Pogues Run, Fall Creek, Pleasant Run, and the White River. What this means is that when it rains, all of the water that's collected on the ground makes its way through storm drains that lead into the sewers that dump into the streams. Normally, this wouldn't be a problem if we lived on a prairie, but since we live in an urban area with a flourishing infrastructure, harmful things such as motor oil, pesticides, and anything else that the water can gather along the way will end up there as well. The contamination doesn't stop there. The city's wastewater is managed by a combined sewer overflow system, or CSO for short. To help me explain what this is, we ask a couple of very important guys from the Citizens Energy Group, what exactly is a CSO?
There's two kinds of flow that need to be attended to. There's sanitary flow, which comes from homes. It's you flush your toilet, you take a shower, that water has to be dealt with. You also have storm water, that when it rains, that water needs to be dealt with as well. And so in the early years of the city, in order to save money, they didn't separate that. They let the storm water and the sanitary sewage come together, and that became what's known as combined sewage.
A combined sewer overflow that the city of Indianapolis is plagued with, and really over 700 communities in the United States are plagued with, is years ago, before there was really indoor plumbing, people decided to connect their wastewater systems into their storm sewer systems and thought literally, hey, let's dump them to the streams. There'll be so much volume in the streams versus volume from us that it won't really make a difference. Well, soon they found out that that was a pretty big problem. By that point, billions and billions of dollars had been spent building these networks that dump to the streams. Soon afterwards, they built a series of what they call interceptor systems that tried to intercept some of that flow, but those interceptors were smaller pipes and couldn't capture everything. So what happens is in dry weather, usually you're capturing everything. Actually, under the EPA guidance, you have to capture everything. But in wet weather, in other words, when it rains, those overflows exceed their capacity, and the combined sewer overflows actually overflow to the streams.
The streams were more or less open sewers. There were local sewers that served neighborhoods that discharged straight into the creek, into Pogues Run, into Fall Creek, into Pleasant Run, into White River.
There are quite a few public parks that were built around these streams. These are parks with playgrounds.
Hopefully, this can explain more than our parents did why we weren't allowed to play in creeks when we were kids. The problem here is that kids love water, and the truth is a lot of them will play in it regardless of the rules that their parents set out for them. This brings up a very daunting question. If we can't always keep our children from playing in the water, then
how can we make our waterways safe for our children?
The problem of the combined sewer overflow is not a new one. The combined sewer system in most of these cities, over 700 in the United States, was built in some areas over 100 years ago. But really there was no kind of holistic way to deal with it. And so what happened is, under the Clean Water Act in the 1970s, EPA said, hey, thou shalt not pollute the waterways, the Clean Water Act. Everybody's heard of that.
Wait, what's the Clean Water Act? I've never heard of this.
Well, the Clean Water Act is a law that was passed in 1972 that basically established a goal to eliminate the release of high amounts of toxic substances into our rivers and streams. The goal, as it were, was that by 1985, all additional water pollution would be eliminated.
Soon afterwards, they said, hey, let's fix these combined sewer systems. Okay, well, that's a good idea, but how? How much do we want to invest? Do we want to totally fix it? Do we want to partially fix it? And so EPA then, during the 80s and 90s, came out with guidance documents. Basically says, to the point of affordability in your city, you should fix these combined sewer systems. So what that is really it's a measure of some percent, up to 2% of the median household income. We want you to invest that in the combined sewer system and in your wastewater program. So the solution is really, you have to go through a very long, drawn-out process of analyzing your system, maximizing the way it operates, and then investing heavily in capital to start addressing the combined sewer overflow problem.
So it seems like sewage has been a problem for a long time.
Oh yeah. In fact, as early as the late 1800s, there have been planning committees and decision-making groups made up of important men and women who think about things like this so us common folk don't have to.
You make us sound so advanced.
Let's take a trip back in time and find out about some of the first decisions made in this great city in regards to water, shall we? It is said that two of the first European settlers to Indianapolis was John Wesley McCormick and George Pogue in the 1820s. This was actually just a few years before Indianapolis was in fact the beloved capital city that we know today. Before all of this, the area known today as Indianapolis was nothing but swampland that sparsely inhabited human life. That's right, the land where about 1 million people live, work, play, and breathe each day at one time was almost underwater. That's hard to believe when you look at Indianapolis today as being one of the largest landlocked cities in the world, meaning there are no major waterways in or surrounding it.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Really?
Would I lie?
Do you really want me to answer that?
Anyway, there's a reason I brought George Pogue into this discussion. Sometime between 1819 and 1820, George Pogue built a cabin on the banks of a small stream, which at the time was called Perkins Run, at an intersection where Michigan Street is today. After a disappearance by Pogue in April of 1921, Perkins Run was renamed Pogue's Run.
So...
I'm getting somewhere with this. Pogue's Run is just one of the few streams that run into the White River. Now keep in mind that Pogue's Run runs straight through the south side of downtown.
Hold on, now I've been downtown quite a bit and I don't know of any stream flowing through it.
That's because you can't see it. It's below you.
It's underground?
That's right.
You mean to tell me that as we speak there is a stream that is flowing under our feet?
It's called the Pogue's Run Tunnel or Pogue's Run Box Culvert. In fact, it actually flows under buildings like Bankers Life Fieldhouse and even Lucas Oil Stadium.
Whoa, my mind is just right now.
The Pogue's Run Box Culvert was built between 1914 and 1916. It's a 2-mile-long tunnel that starts at New York Street, just east of the I-65 and I-70 junction, and flows into the White River somewhere near the intersection of Kentucky Avenue and McCarty Street. Pogue's Run actually flows parallel to the old railroad before it reaches Union Station, and that's really important to know because in the beginning, both the railroad and the tunnel played a rather large role in the development of Indianapolis, in particular with two very large problems.
Because of the way the sewer system was set up, there was a lot of raw sewage just flowing into the creek on a day-to-day basis. It's a pretty unpleasant place to be around. So one of the reasons to start the Pogue's Run Box Culvert or the Pogue's Run Tunnel was to actually to enclose that, to try to alleviate some of the smell downtown. But also there was a problem with the railroads in the city. That was important because there were so many trains coming through town on a regular basis. Whenever a train came through, and there were lots of trains coming through, more or less the city ground to a halt. You couldn't go north or south on Meridian or any of the streets east and west of Meridian. Imagine what it's like today when you're trying to go into town on Michigan Street and you get caught by a train there just before you get to downtown. Imagine that, dozens more trains during the course of the day. And that was the problem that they were trying to deal with.
The solution was to elevate the railroads so that they could be routed over the city streets and cut down on traffic congestion.
Elevating the track was a major goal and had been a major goal for many years. Getting the land to be able to do that, Pogues Run encroached on some of the land that would have been necessary to elevate those tracks. So in order to complete the track elevation project, they needed to get the land. In order to get the land, they needed to do something with Pogues Run, so they enclosed it in the box, the culvert, and they also rerouted it in some places so that it wasn't where the train tracks wanted to be.
A project like this was not without complications. In order to raise the tracks, they needed to build the tunnel. But in order to build the tunnel, they needed help from the railroad companies to fund the project. The railroad companies, after some hesitancy, agreed that they would pay up to 70% of a box culvert and track elevation project that was to take place simultaneously.
So what about the other 30%? Who paid for that?
Property owners in the nearby area.
That had to be a headache for property owners. I'm sure there are a lot of people who didn't want to do that.
Actually, not a lot of people minded. They just wanted that disgusting sewage smell to be gone. The added bonus of not getting stuck in traffic jams was like the icing on the cake. Or maybe the absence of traffic jams was what they wanted, and the absence of the sewage smell was the icing on the cake. Either way, from when the planning started in 1908, the project had seen 2 mayors, a contract lawsuit, and numerous bidding wars. But in 1914, the Dunn-McCarthy Construction Company would start construction on the Pogues Run Tunnel and track elevation for a payment of just under $1 million.
That's a lot of money now. I hate to think about what it was back then.
Yeah, it was a lot, but it was actually substantially less than they previously thought.
With any big public works project like this, where there's lots of public money being spent, there's always an interest in making sure that everyone knows that the project has gotten started. So the project started with the mayor, Joseph Bell, actually running one of the steam shovels to get the project started. There was obviously a groundbreaking ceremony. It was a big event for the city. This was one of the biggest public works projects that had ever been undertaken by the city, and there was a celebration.
So now Pogues Run is unsmelly and unseen, hidden away and forgotten. It's kind of tragic when you think about it, but really from what I understand, Pleasant Run and Pogues Run aren't really quaint little waterways. They're more like open sewers.
They aren't like open sewers, they actually are. I think it's safe to say that we still have a long way to go before we can boast about our clean waterways. I can say for certain that I haven't given up, and I know I'm not the only one.
In 1972, the Clean Water Act mandated that localities, cities and towns had to start doing things about their sewage problems. It took several decades to work through the biggest parts of the problem, because the biggest parts of the problem were the treatment plants needed to be bigger. But once they got through that, starting about the mid-90s, the focus turned to the combined sewer overflows. And there were policies put into place and enforcement actions taken by EPA to compel localities to start dealing with the CSO problem and start coming up with plans for dealing with the CSO problem. That's really the modern era of CSOs, started in the mid-90s with the CSO policy.
We still have separate stormwater systems that dump directly to the streams, and those stormwater systems are now starting to be treated also with end-of-pipe treatment or intermediate treatment processes, whether they're a vegetated swale or a manufactured best management practice. EPA has new guidance documents to help stormwater runoff be cleaner as it hits the streams too.
I'm kind of curious about this vegetated swale business. What's that all about?
Have you ever seen those ditches next to parking lots in the suburbs that contain lots of tall grass and wild brush? Those are actually in place to act as runoff for rainwater as it falls nearby. From there, the tall grass and wild brush can act as a filter for water and clean it up a bit before it hits the streams. In sort of a weird way, the Pogues Run Art and Nature Park is a really, really cool and much larger scale version of that, but it actually serves 2 purposes.
The Pogues Run Art and Nature Park, as it's known of today, was originally constructed the name Pogues Run CSO Reduction and Flood Control Facility, Emerson Avenue site. It is an area that was used for flood control, or its main purpose was flood control. It also improves water quality through the basin, and it provides great educational and recreational opportunities. The water quality aspect of the project comes from a couple different fronts. The stream itself was one of the most polluted streams in the city of Indianapolis for multiple reasons. It's in an urban watershed, so by that nature it was somewhat polluted with runoffs from all these urban areas and these densely populated areas with septic tanks and various things going on upstream, and also because of pretty significant combined sewer overflows, especially downstream of the basin. But then the basin itself was designed as an engineered wetland with acres of wetland plantings throughout the bottom to improve the water quality of the water that's actually flowing into the basin, meandering through the basin, and then ultimately discharging downstream.
So that's pretty cool. The wetlands are designed to improve the water quality?
Pretty much.
How does that work?
Well, there are actually a number of factors that go into this, including the direction and speed of the water flow and, guess what else? That's right, plant life.
Yeah, this part right here is the sedge meadow wet prairie area, and it's actually a little bit higher. This area was actually seeded with a seed mix of 44 native species. More than half of those were grass and sedge and rush species. The rest were forbs. And those plants were selected because of their ability to kind of uptake nutrients and filter pollutants. We designed the basin to have 4 communities: open water, mudflat component, emergent wetland, and then this wet prairie sedge meadow community. This area, the wetlands and then the open water, is just designed so that the contaminants and pollutants can kind of just drop down. It slows everything down enough that these pollutants can drop down and the water can just be still and allow everything to settle, essentially.
So not only does the vegetation filter out the harmful stuff, the plant life slows the water down enough to let the contamination particles settle to the bottom of the creek bed?
That's right.
Genius!
Yeah, this isn't just a 44-acre long parkway, only good for Sunday strolls, although it is perfect for that. It serves a purpose on such a greater scale.
Who knew the ecosystem would be hard at work here?
Well, these guys did for one.
Some of the plants that we selected, specifically like the rushes and the reeds and the sedges, you can see a lot of them down here, this bulrush down here, and it was selected because certain plants have this biofilm actually on them that uptakes smaller contaminants that aren't large enough to just drop and settle to the ground. These plants actually draw up those pollutants and then transpire them into the air. So, I mean, that's kind of a cool thing. They don't actually maintain those pollutants in their bodies, but they're covered with this like sticky biofilm that kind of allows them to take up dissolved pollutants. Basically, we have a monitoring station set up directly upstream of the basin and one directly downstream of the basin. So our studies over the last 5 years have shown that E. coli from top to bottom has been reduced 50%. Total suspended solids have been reduced about 40%. And then dissolved oxygen overall is up 15% in the basin.
Over 100 years ago, the city of Indianapolis had an issue that seemed, at the time, more important regarding water mitigation. As stated earlier, the Near East Side is a basin. Thanks to these important decision-making men and women, we can live within this basin without the fear that our homes will be flooded because this basin that some of us live in was, at one time, a floodplain. In 1913, the Midwest suffered a great flood where hundreds of people lost their lives. In Indianapolis, the devastation was extensive. All waterways, including the Wabash, White, and Ohio River, overflowed and breached levees, causing what is known today as the 100-year flood, named because of its occurrence roughly every 100 years. You may be thinking to yourself, that means we're due for another flood in the coming year of 2013. Some actually speculate that the weather system that caused the 100-year flood already happened, and we just didn't notice because the basin was doing its job.
The basin has had documented proof of water quality improvements, but it's also had documented proof of flood control benefits as well, specifically during Labor Day flood of 2003, the watershed experienced near or right above a 100-year rain event, which brought the basin up to basically its design level or near its design level within approximately 1 foot of overtopping the dam structure, which is at the downstream end. Without the flood control facility and benefit in place at that time, it's known based on history that there would have been definitely impacts to the cottage home area and to the Near East Side of Indianapolis.
So it's because of the Pogues Run Art and Nature Park.
And others like it.
And others like it are the reason why the 100-year flood.
And other floods like it.
And other floods like it have not been devastating.
Yep.
That's cool. So it's great to know that the city has taken all these steps towards reducing all the waste and pollution in the water and started to tackle that pesky CSO problem.
That's right, but we're not out of the water yet. No pun intended. The White River, as beautiful as it looks, is still no place for recreational activities like swimming just yet.
It's kind of tragic when you think about it. You know what we've done to the White River. I mean, we basically rendered it useless for any human enjoyment because we decided a long time ago that we'd dump all our waste in it. Just think about how different the banks of the river would be downtown if we hadn't decided to use it as a toilet.
It really seems like a mistake, I know. Truth is, we just didn't have the technology to develop a clean system for disposing of the waste.
So they're going to pour concrete all the way up to here, too.
Luckily, today we do. And in fact, do you remember those important men and women that we discussed earlier
Yeah.
who think about things like this so that us common folk don't have to? Well, they figured out a solution, and it all starts with that old-fashioned combined sewer system.
People have asked me, why don't you just separate the sewer system back? You know, build a separate stormwater system and a separate sanitary system. And off on the surface that sounds, well, that seems pretty reasonable. We got stormwater, you got rainwater that just becomes stormwater that goes to the creek anyhow. What we've done is we've ran some water quality modeling, and as many other cities in the country did, and found out that in fact, if you separate the stormwater from the sanitary sewer that's in this combined sewer, what happens is separation costs more and it doesn't improve the water quality. Now that sounds a little counterintuitive, but here's exactly why. Right now, that stormwater that's going into the combined sewer system is going to the treatment plant and getting treated to the tune of 6 to 8 billion gallons a year of combined sewage and stormwater. If you separate that back out, you're now just having separate sanitary sewer system waste that's getting treated, but stormwater that is going directly to the streams. So what's happening? It's running off the farm field. It's running off your yard that you've just put all the pesticides down and fertilizer. It's running off the parking lots where oils and antifreeze has been dripping for years, and it's washing into the streams. When people see rainwater coming out of the pipe, it may look clean, but remember, all your oils, pollutants, and bacteria are captured around particles. It may be somewhat clean when it comes out of the sky. By the time it hits the rivers, without any kind of treatment, it's a very dirty water. The Deep Rock Tunnel Connector Project is a series of tunnels that's going to be built far underneath the city, about over 200 feet deep, about 25 miles long. And they have tunnel systems that are shallow, basically big interceptors, but these are literally tunnels built with tunnel boring machines, about 18 foot in diameter, and it's to capture combined sewage overflow that otherwise would go to the streams. And this is not a new solution. This is a solution that many big cities are using to capture and then treat the combined sewage overflows.
To be more specific, the Deep Rock Tunnel system will be a series of 5 tunnels. The first tunnel makes its way from the Southport Water Treatment Facility, where all of the water will essentially end up. From there, the construction of the tunnel will lead into the White River. That will be the second segment. Connected to that, you will find the third segment, the Lower Pogues Run Tunnel.
Not to be confused with the Pogues Run Box Culvert Tunnel.
That's right, they're separate tunnels. At the end of the White River segment, we'll come to the Fall Creek segment, which will obviously follow Fall Creek until it reaches its end at 38th Street near the State Fairgrounds. For the final segment, we will track back south a ways to the Pleasant Run segment, which will actually lead to the first segment, the Deep Rock Tunnel Connector. All of this is supposed to be completed by the year 2025.
Well, they better get started on it.
Actually, construction is already underway for the first segment that starts at the Water Treatment Facility. Would you like to see it?
Of course.
This particular leg of the tunnel is approximately 8 miles in length, and This is our spine for our tunnel system. We're going to tour the job site. We have a launch shaft that's ultimately under construction. It's near the end. Right now the starter and tail tunnels are under construction. Launch shaft is a vertical shaft, 251 feet below grade. The tunnel boring machine will be constructed ultimately inside the tunnel. In order to construct it and make it operable, we have to have the distance down in the hole to fully construct the 450 feet long tunnel boring machine. It's a great job site. It's a huge job site. It'll be the biggest one we ever have for a launch of a tunnel, and going to show the wherewithal of the project site. Let's march on back to the launch shaft. He's building up a pretty good stockpile. I think too, everything you see is from 250 feet below grade. All that aggregate over there. Steel wall you see up there is how they tip the bucket coming out of the hole. Morning, Bob.
How you doing, John?
Doing great. Going great. Morning. As the muck buckets come up, they hook in. If you look at the top of the wall, it's got kind of a fifth wheel setup on it. So that muck bucket comes up and there's a cable coming down below it. It hooks into that fifth wheel and then they push it and the whole mechanism tips and all the spoil dumps on this side. It's genius. But watching this operation, it's so simple, but it's genius. They just make everything to where they keep manpower out of the way and use equipment all the time. And when you look at the volume of material that's going to come out of this hole, once they got that set up, they don't have to mess with it anymore.
So why do they need to go so far down? I mean, 270 feet seems awfully deep.
They're actually doing it because it's non-obtrusive to groundwater wells, utility lines, and property values. There's very little surface work being done, so that pavement restorations and traffic closures won't be necessary. In fact, we probably won't even know it's being done. It just makes more sense.
Indianapolis has a lot of similarities to what I'd call comparable sized cities, so not unique. What is unique though in Indianapolis is the cost of their tunnels. If you just look at a quick and dirty metric, which is cost per capita, it is one of the most cost-effective, lowest cost per capita consent decrees in the country. This program is the single biggest thing that we will probably ever do to White River to improve the condition of the river.
It's been a long time since George Pogue took shelter in a cabin. I mean, just think if he were alive today. I wonder what he would think of having an open sewer named after him.
Do you think he'd be one of the people helping to clean up the stream?
What if he could care less? What if it was just a coincidence that he happened to find a cabin on the banks of the stream? I guess it doesn't matter, really. By this point in the life of the city, the damage is done, don't you think?
I don't know. I'd like to think he'd be proud. We've come a long way from an environmental standpoint.
Perhaps you're right.
This is really cool engineering. We're talking about depths of 275 feet, pump stations the size of a treatment plant, tunnels that are 18 foot in diameter, 25 miles long. Eventually we're going to get back to the point where White River will be beautiful, pristine, and we'll bring it back to really an attraction where people can use it and not be worried about getting into the stream. So it's pretty exciting to be a part of.
Let's try to imagine, if we can, a pristine White River. Imagine a clean Pogues Run. Right now, if you were to say you were going down to the White River for a swim, who would most certainly raise a few eyebrows or get a few laughs? To most people, such an idea might seem a bit crazy. The streams have essentially been open sewers for decades, even centuries. These waterways were here even before us as vibrant flowing streams, clean enough to bathe in. Then we came, and with us came oil, pesticides, and a barrage of toxins. Now, thanks to modern technology and engineering, a clean White River does not have to be something just left to the imagination. It can become a reality, and if done right, one day, going for a swim in the White River won't raise any eyebrows.